Thank you for being on this podcast. Our new guest's work has fundamentally shaped the sound and the conversation around Indigenous Australia for over 3 decades. He is a proud Hunwurrung man and an award-winning force in both music and media. You know him as the founding guitarist and vocalist for the legendary Indigenous music rock band Blackfire, who earned an International Songwriting Award for their classic track, My Island Paradise. But our guest is also a media pioneer, the creative genius and host behind the iconic and Logie-nominated show, The Marngrook Footy Show, which served as a major vehicle for reconciliation and gave a powerful voice to Indigenous athletes for over 12 years. He's a musician, a broadcaster, and the creator of the annual Share the Spirit Festival in Melbourne, Australia. Please welcome a true Australian leader and cultural elder statesman, the one and only Grant Hansen.
Thanks, brother. That was a pretty good introduction. I felt like this was your life, Dave.
Yeah.
It took you 3 minutes to get through all of that.
Oh,
thank you, brother. That's so nice.
I don't know where to start because you have done so much. Ideally what I'd like to do is just hear where did it start?
Oh, well, I think it basically started from a love of music. I grew up in the 70s in Australia, and that was the golden era of Australian music from the 70s, probably 74 to probably the late 80s. It was a real golden era. And I grew up watching shows like Sound Unlimited and Countdown. And Australian music ruled the airways in those days. You turn on radio, whether it was 2SM in Sydney or 3XY in Melbourne, and all you heard was Aussie bands. And you'd hear Dragon and Skyhawks and Old 55 and Cold Chisel and all those bands. But the good thing about it was you could watch them on the TV, and the next week you'd go to a local pub and actually see that band playing, And there were so many great bands that, you couldn't help but be inspired by the music. And one day a group of mates of mine was sitting around my house that I grew up in and thought we should form a band. None of us could actually play, so we all decided to go and get some music lessons. I think I lasted three nights, and the other guys didn't even bother going. So that was my first sort of thought process about being a musician, is I wanted to play in the band. I like the idea of music and performing and all that, and sort of started off with that sort of thought. But then I worked my way into radio, and I worked at 3CR in Melbourne as the host of the Koori music show, and from there I went on to form the Marngrook radio show, which was the precursor to the TV show. So from a love of music, went from there to radio and then into TV, and I never stopped playing music that whole time. And I played with a number of different artists, but that's where that sort of started back, was just my love for Australian music and just my love for a good rock song.
Yeah, wow, that's fantastic. And you say those years were the best years, the 80s.
Yeah, the 74 onwards. The
70s.
To the late 80s, yeah.
And why? Because was those Australian bands that you mentioned only famous here in Australia? Were they famous internationally?
Good point. That's a very good point. Probably no. The answer to that would be they weren't famous overseas, but they didn't need to be, because they were king of the Australian TV and king of the radio airwaves here. So, but the good thing was they were singing songs about Australian people. They had Skyhawks singing about Melbourne suburbs, not about Tennessee or New York or whatever. They were singing songs that us people could relate to. And always found that the Australian music had a sound of its own, because it was born out of the pub scene, out of the pub rock scene. And as I said, to be able to watch someone on TV, and that very next week you'd go to a pub and you'd see that band playing. And a lot of the guys couldn't get on Countdown or Sound Unlimited quick enough, because if you had a really good catchy song, you knew the chances of that being a hit would be pretty good. So everyone always had these catchy tunes that you would like on the first play that you heard. And the first time you heard of it, geez, you'd run down to the record shop, because it was records in those days, and you'd want to buy the album and you'd want to buy the single. And I don't know whether you're old enough, but you used to have an album, you'd open up the album and have all the lyrics in there and have where it was produced and who recorded it, where it was done, and just to read the album cover and all the credits. And, it was something that you don't get now with modern music, on download stuff off social media and stuff like that. So it was really exciting. It was the whole package basically in those days.
And I know you look a lot younger than what you actually are. I won't give it away, but you were born and raised around Melbourne though, right?
Yeah. Yeah, my parents split up when I was 11, 12 years old, I think it was. And my mother's Aboriginal, my father's Australian. And so I grew up with my mum. Mum was on a pension. I went to a high school, and it was a multicultural school. It was really good growing up with a lot of different cultures. And my friends were Greeks and Italian and Yugoslav and all that. So I had a lot of different friends from different backgrounds. But I grew up with my mum, and my mum was a really good mother. She was the backbone. She supported me. I was a really good sports person at football and cricket and all that sort of stuff, and music. And my mum was really my strength and still is possibly still my biggest fan. Obviously, most mothers are, but she was a really good mother, and she worked hard. And I started work when I was 15 to help, bring money into the household. So I was just pretty fortunate that my mum was a, good, strong black woman and pointed me in the right direction, and could be hard on me when she needs to be hard on me, and celebrate my achievements as well when she needs to do that.
It's interesting, everybody has their favourite time, back in the music, and I actually wonder, is it because of the actual age you were at that time?
Good point. That is another good point, and probably so, because music's a bit of an escape. Particularly in those days, there wasn't a lot of things you could do. So the radio was your friend. You'd go to bed with your little transistor radio, and I'd be checking that out, listening to all the different country areas and picking up Shepparton or Bendigo, and you'd be listening to all that Australian music that we just spoke about. So music was my friend, and particularly when you're lonely and you're in a house by yourself. Mum would go out to work as a cleaner, and I'd be at home by myself and half shit myself because I was in the house by myself. But music became my friend, and you get a lot out of listening to music. It brings up a lot of emotions, but a lot of that music from that period brings back a lot of good memories for me. So it's like a song will instantly bring back a time and place that I was at that particular time.
I had a bit of a list of the bands that you got into.
Yeah.
But before we can touch on those, what was it that got you into playing?
Well, what actually happened was I became really good friends with a band called Old 55. When I was 16, I met the guys. I snuck into a pub in Essendon with another mate of mine who was only 14. We put on about 3 or 4 jumpers, and we got into the pub. And I was with another friend who was talking to the bass player after the gig, called me over and introduced me to the bass player. His name was Terry Dalu, and he invited me and my friend to the next Old 55 gig the next night. And we said to him, we're a little bit young, we can't get into the pub. He said, don't worry, you meet the roadies at the back at 4 o'clock. They're bringing in all the equipment, and you can help them bring it in, and you can be part of the road crew. So that's how we started to get into the pub. But through Old 55, I became immersed in the music business and seeing how they put on gigs, went up to Sydney and went to a lot of gigs up there and watched them play and learn a bit about the other side of the industry, because it's showbiz, right? So you got the show, then you got the business, and Pat and Rockpile, who were the original members, taught me how to play songs, and I used to ring them up and say, oh, how do you play that song? And they'd tell me the chords, and I'd get it home and I'd play along to the record. So it was basically through my involvement with them boys that really gave me that craving and wanting to have my own band and have hit records and be on TV and do the things that they did, because they had #1 hit songs and big albums, #1 albums. And so as a young kid, to be able to become friends with them, stay at their houses in Sydney and go to a lot of gigs with them, that sort of was a really good insight, which put me in good stead for where I went to later on in my music career.
Yeah, talk about learning to run before you can walk. 16, you can't get into the bar, but you're in the music scene now.
Yeah.
In there with the roadies, and you're learning the business side of music. It explains a lot to me, because I know you as a musician now, and through one of your bands, Blackfire, which we'll get into. But what was the name of your first band?
First band was an Indigenous band here in Melbourne. It's called Interaction.
Yep.
and we were a covers band playing a lot of old 55 Deltones, a lot of rock and roll songs, 60s and 70s and 50s music. And we were one of the very few bands at that time in the Melbourne Aboriginal community. And we used to pack it out, brother. We used to have blackouts where you could hardly move. I remember sometimes holding my guitar like that because someone was standing right in front of me. And it was, they were awesome days.
Age?
Probably about 24.
One of the few Aboriginal bands at the time. Take us back to that time. How many Aboriginal bands were there?
Well, there wasn't too many at that time. There was a band called Hard Times that had played down here. Uncle Herbie Patton had been a solo artist. At that particular time when we played, there wasn't any other bands around in Melbourne that were playing.
And this is Melbourne artists as well, these bands?
Yeah. So we came along after those guys had stopped playing. Uncle Johnny Lovett was another one that played, and Uncle Harry Williams played as well. But at that time when we started playing, no one else was actually doing, there wasn't a band around. So we became the popular community band as it was in that time.
Yeah.
And what actually happened was when that band stopped playing, a funny thing happened because I went on to help form Blackfire. Richard Franklin, who's a well-known film producer and musician, went on to form a band called Jambi, who later, he had his sisters in that band who became the Titters. And then the other guys that were left over played with another band called Stray Blacks. So out of that one band, when we stopped playing, spawned 3 other bands: Blackfire, Jambi, Titters, and the Stray Blacks. So, and all those bands went on to have really successful careers.
So was Selwyn Burns in your band back then?
No, Selwyn came in the next band, which was 2 bands after that, was Blackfire. Selwyn was a very talented musician. He was our hero for me and Bradley and Callie McGuinness, who was original Blackfire members. We worshipped Selwyn because he was such a great guitar player. He was playing in Coloured Stone. We all worked in radio at 3CR, and Selwyn would be playing with Coloured Stone and the Human Love album and the Wild Desert Rose album and Crazy Love. Selwyn, this guitar virtuoso, was he was a god. So when we started to play with Blackfire at the early days, we were just mesmerised by Selwyn, because anything I could play on guitar, he could play 100 times better. Anything on bass, same with Brad. And so we really looked up to Selwyn as showing us the way. And with his experience in Coloured Stone, he was good friends with Shane Howard, and he played with a lot of people. So at the start, he was really our inspiration. And we talk about songwriters, and Selwyn Burns, the songs that he writes, people say I'm a good songwriter, but I'm not. I always tell people I'm not at Selwyn's level, because Selwyn is such a great, insightful songwriter in terms about what he writes about. And he really inspired me to become a better songwriter because he was so good at it. And we adored Selwyn, like us guys, me and Kutcher and Callie McGuinness and Bradley Brown. When we first started, we looked up to him. He could talk a lot, he could talk a leg off a chair, but we loved him. And he was inspiring for us because he was getting excited about us and we were getting excited about. So we just had this bubbling energy that was just bouncing off each other.
It sounds like that energy was with you guys the whole way, though. Like, to tell me the first band you were a part of, that you had to play with the guitar because there was somebody in the audience just there. A band that's drawing crowds like that's got to go places.
Yeah. Well, that was interaction. It was a cover band, so we knew our sort of limits, that we weren't going to break it out into the top 40. But, that band was a precursor, as I said, for these other bands. If that band hadn't happened, we probably wouldn't have, because Kelly and Brad actually joined the interaction later on. So a couple of members went through that band as we went through the years. But as I said, the great thing about that band is it spawned Jambi, it spawned Titters, and it spawned Stray Blacks and Blackfire. So you got really, 4 really good bands out of that initial lineup.
Back then in Melbourne, how easy was it to get a gig?
Well, it wasn't very easy. Pubs were very limited in having Aboriginal bands play because they want to attract Aboriginal audiences. They always thought there'd be trouble there, and there was only a handful of pubs that would let us play. There was a pub called JC's, which an old mate of mine, Paddy McGarity, worked for the union, trades union, and they had access to JC's, so that's how we got into JC's. But the Eastern Hotel on the corner was another pub where we first started interaction gigs that were Koori friendly, so to speak. But there wasn't too many. Baden Power Hotel was another one. So there wasn't too many pubs that that would let Aboriginal bands play in there because they didn't want Aboriginal audiences.
Yep. And also, I guess that time it was really fresh too. Referendum had only,
Well, 67. This is probably about 86, something like that.
So the next generation
Yeah.
coming through. What were you guys doing after you've gone and performed? What happens after the show?
An interaction band? Interaction? I know this has been recorded, so I'll keep it brief. But, we'd go to a party afterwards, or sometimes you might be a bit sort of tired and you go home and go to sleep.
Yeah, it can be addictive, sleep. And, you can just open your eyes to this other world. And it's must have been good sleep because it's kept you in the music all this time.
Yeah, I've been lucky. Look, I think about some of the people that I played with, some of the people I've managed, some of the records I've played on, some of the records I've produced, and I have to pinch myself sometimes because to be able to do that's a real buzz.
There's a long list of people that you've worked with, and we'll get into that as well. I'd love to. But tell us in terms of that covers band, and then what's the next band after that?
Well, after that, I went to a band called the Mercury Blues, and that was half Latin and half Koori. So we do songs like La Bamba, and we do some of the old standard rock and roll songs and some of the Motown songs. And there was like 4 of us, 6 of us in the band, three Latins and 3 Kooris, and that was a little bit similar to Interaction in the fact that it was a cover band, and it lasted for about 3 or 4 years, and it was fun playing in the Latin community as well. So we had the Koori and the Latin community to play to, and they were good times.
Still limited to Melbourne?
Yeah, still in the Melbourne scene at that time. Yeah, we sort of didn't look that far ahead. When you're a cover band, you're sort of just happy to get gigs locally and play around town. So it was a very similar.
More than enough.
But exactly. Just happy to play. Yeah.
After this band, what's next?
Well, we go to Blackfire then.
Oh.
Yeah, so we start Blackfire.
And what year are we in at this time?
Well, 1992.
Oh, wow.
1992 that was.
And by then, you've kind of grown now.
Well, yeah, I am. I'm a bit older. But actually, the band came about through a mate of mine who was the CEO down at Healesville Aboriginal Co-op. And he rang me up. I used to work with him at another job. And he said to me, Grant, I'm going to have a function down here. I want to put Healesville on the map in Melbourne. So I want you to get a band together and come down and play. And he said, can you do that for me, brother? I said, yeah, sure, no worries. So I rang up Kelly and Brad, who said, yep, no worries, we'll play. And then I rang up Selwyn, and then he didn't want to play. He said, I just left Coloured Stone and I'm finished with the music industry. And I said, cuz, can you just play bass for us then? Because I haven't got a bass player. So begrudgingly, to his credit, he said he would. And we went down there, and I tell you what, brother, we knocked them dead that night. It just really gelled. There was just something magic about it. And then Selwyn said, look, we should keep the band going, but I'll play only if we do original stuff.
Wow.
So that was the precursor of us starting to write songs. So me and Kelly would write songs, Selwyn would write songs. So we started doing all this original stuff, and the rehearsals were something that went for hours and hours because we just had so much fun playing. But once again, it was Selwyn. They had these great original songs, Want to Go Back and Live Like Quarries and Suicide Road. And then me and Kelly come up with Rockin' the Hard Place and Baby and Beginning of Time and all those sorts of songs. And it was just this gelling of all of us and all our music influences all together. Because Selwyn's about my age, so me and Selwyn know all the same bands and grew up. And same as Kelly. So we had this sort of background in Australian music that we all love, but also writing these original songs.
Yeah.
It was awesome.
Up to that stage, he covers bands and sounds like a creative as well. Yeah. As good as Selwyn was, leaving a great band like Coloured Stones, and look, I'll continue on with Blackfire only if we do originals.
Yeah.
Can you explain to those who might not know, what's that difference between just singing covers and then singing originals?
Well, obviously when you're singing covers, you're singing someone else's song, someone else's creation, and you get a good vibe out if you're playing to a pretty good room full of people. But when it's your own song and you see the reaction of people, and then once they get to know those songs and actually singing them as you're playing and you're looking out into the audience, and you see people singing your song, and they're driving around in their car playing your CD, and they drive past, you can hear the song out. Now, that's a really good feeling, you know. You feel like you've accomplished something, that somebody knows your song.
And more importantly than that, when you go and sing one of these famous songs that everybody knows that somebody else wrote, every time you perform that song, money goes back to that person.
Yes.
When you mob writing it, money goes to more.
Yeah, that's right. That's a funny thing, the music industry, because in those days, if you sold records and you sold albums and CDs were coming in at that stage, you could actually make a good earn out of it. But if you're a musician in today's world, I wouldn't get too excited about trying to make money in it.
Yeah, that digital world is too easily accessible, which is a good thing, but
not for the artist.
So it sounds like there's been a big shift going into Blackfire. Can you share some of your experiences with that?
Well,
we're in 92.
Yeah, so the first year we played 100 and something gigs in the first year. We played so many major festivals. We made TV appearances on Recovery. And then after that first couple of years, we teamed up with Paul Hester, who came and watched us performing at the Victorian Arts Centre. You're still in Crowded House. And he actually knew Kelly and Brad through radio. And Kelly and Brad had been to his house before, but Kelly and Brad in those days are pretty shy. Weren't sort of, very coming forward like, say, I am. And Paul came up to us after the gig and said, geez, that was absolutely awesome. And we're sort of hitting each other, saying, how good is this guy from Crowded House likes ours? And he said to me, would you guys be interested in coming down to my little studio in St Kilda? I've got a mate that has got a studio in his little attic upstairs, and can you come down and record the songs, some of these songs? And I said, yeah, sure. So the next day we're all pumped up, excited that Paul Hester from Crowded House likes our songs. And so off we go the next week down to St Kilda, the studio. So long story short, we're in the studio, Paul's in there, and he says, all right, you Grant, you're on guitar, blah, blah. So we started playing some of the songs. And he'd say, who wrote that song? And I'd say, I wrote that one. Oh, that's awesome. Did you write that one song? Yeah. And he's like, wow, these songs are great. Let's do an album. Don't worry about doing any demos. So that's how we formed the relationship with Paul. He just loved our music, and he became the drummer on our second album. He was the unofficial member of Blackfire, played a lot of gigs with us. We went on his TV show, Hesse Said, that he had running. And as I said, he played quite a few gigs with us, but he just loved our music, and he loved our vibe of our band, probably because we treat each other more as family, and it was probably a different connection. I think he felt isolated after a while playing in Crowded House, and he was sort of, me and Paul become really close mates for over a long time after that, maybe for 10 or 12 years until his passing, which he passed away on my 40th birthday when he was supposed to arrive that night. So getting to know Paul was a good thing for me because I got to learn how to produce records. I went down to his house a lot when he was working with different artists, and he'd call me up to say, come down and have a listen to this song. I need your advice on what you think it is. And sometimes I say, oh, the bass is a bit loud, or blah, 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 blah. And so I learnt a lot of things from Paul working in the studio, and just to be able to play with someone of that caliber, was just, and once again, I'm sitting there thinking, this is the guy from Crowded House. And I remember the song Island Paradise, which won that international award. Well, came third for the best rock song. And I remember going to the studio and being very nervous because on the way down on the radio, they said the number one band voted in the world last night was Crowded House from Australia. And I'm driving my car thinking, shit, I'm going down to his studio. And that just made me really nervous, right? Thinking, oh, wow. So anyway, we got there. Long story short, he said, oh, we're going to do this next song, Island Paradise. He said, right, just me and you, Grant, we're going to play. And I said, what about the rest of the band? He said, no, just me and you. I remember sitting in the chair with my guitar like this, thinking, I want to get out of here. So I was that nervous and my leg was shaking, and I thought, I don't want to stuff up. I don't want to muck up. I don't want to make an idiot of myself. But he was such a good drummer that he sort of carried me, you know what I mean? He was so good at time and all that. But actually, after playing with him for quite some time, he became much better guitar player because of Paul. But he was so engaging, entertaining, and so humble. And also, he made you feel good, Yeah. So after a while, once I got used to him, I used to look so forward to doing music with him. And we learned so much from him. And it just, as I say, tickled pink that a guy of his caliber wanted to work with us.
Yeah, I'd say someone of that caliber, it's just a testament to the material.
Yeah.
And the vibe that you guys had at that time. To attract somebody like that.
Yeah, no doubt.
It must have opened up a lot of doors as well.
Well, it did, because we started touring and went to Asia a few times, and we were the first Western band to play in a lot of the Chinese venues over there. And then we went to Japan, and we went to Taiwan, and then we had the support gig with our manager, Anthony Brown, got the gig with Carlos Santana. So we're playing Sydney Entertainment Centre, Melbourne Entertainment Centre, Adelaide Entertainment Centre. And we're thinking, geez, how good is this? Like, like a dream ride. And, as I said, we've done national television recovery and ICAM and, performing in all the big Indigenous concerts. And we didn't have to look for a gig because people were ringing us up, So, yeah, and then we ended up meeting people like Paul Kelly. Paul Kelly became a close friend as well. And people like, we got to where David Bridie is another one. There was that many people that were around the band at that time, because it was sort of attracting this, this talk in the industry.
Yeah, no, and there was certain other First Nations artists and bands that were coming up through that time as well, that you guys were able to help along the way. So we're talking about Blackfire starting in 92, now starting to tour internationally.
Yeah.
How long's the time span?
So that particular lineup went for 12 years. That was 12 years we played for.
Where's Blackfire music in this period?
So Blackfire music, well, one of the bands that came out of that time was Yothu Yindi, and they smashed it. They had a #1 hit song with Treaty. Jabana made top 10. Tribal West went to #1. And then we got to play quite a few shows with the Yothu Yindi. We became very, very close to that band. I still am today with most of the members. Of course, the late Mundawi Pinga was the charismatic lead singer of that band. And me and him became close friends for 20-something years, and he became a mentor for me. But so Yothu Yindi came along, Christine Anu came along. Troy Casadei was killing in the country scene. So all of a sudden, this next wave of Indigenous artists, including us, Archie Roach, who used to be our special guest on our gigs, like we played a lot of gigs with Archie and Ruby. So we were sort of the next ones that were jumping out. And before they had a rugby band, Joe Geyer, scrap metal. We loved scrap metal. We Blackfire boys, we used to always play their music. So many great artists, pioneering artists in those days. And then the 90s, us guys started breaking through. We became that next wave of Indigenous musos.
Yeah, it's interesting, in terms of our favourite times as we go back. Even though you had all that success in the 90s and the early 2000s, you still say 70s to 80s was the best.
Yeah, just for me, I like that music. I like the Australian content. Like, it was all over the radio. It's not all over the radio now. It's quite the opposite. There's, probably about 5% of new Australian music on radio. In those days, it was at least 70%, So, that's what I liked about Australian radio supporting Australian music.
In that time when you were touring a lot with Blackfire, any of favourite venues or gigs?
Royal Derby was our local venue here in Melbourne that we played a lot at, and that used to always be a blackout on a Thursday night, and you'd have the name Blackfire up on the pub. So if you drove past, you could help us see our name. So we became famous just for the band's name on the pub. That was really good exposure. Look, there were so many really good gigs that we played at. I mean, when you're playing in front of a lot of people in those days, probably the entertainment centres of the Carlos Santana was pretty special. And any gig that we played with Paul Hester was good. His TV show that we performed on Yes He Said, that was a blast. But most of the gigs, really, we love travelling. We love meeting new people, new blackfellas, and meeting the mob, and learning all the different tribes, and having a yarn. But we're always pretty friendly, so we always went over pretty well when we toured to other Aboriginal communities.
Yeah, no, that's really important, is to know that it's not just the performing side of this business that we get to experience and enjoy.
Yeah.
It's actually meeting people, and even just being on the road itself, going through country.
Yeah, and we always used to drop into the local co-op or the local health service, so we're always conscious of doing the right protocol when we went somewhere, giving out free tickets or free CDs, and letting them know that we'd come to town and we're paying respects to the elders there, and doing all that protocol stuff. I'm not sure whether that happens so much these days, but we were brought up to be very conscious of that, so that we always made a beeline to head to the local Aboriginal organisations when we were in the country town.
I heard one of the old Blackfire members telling me that they had some roadkill to get a feed. So what was the money like back then?
Well, I think the money was okay. I mean, we weren't poor, but we weren't rich either. And, we spent our money on having a good time most of the time. Like, getting money, getting paid for the gig was a bonus for us. We just happened to play. Whether we got $500 each or $50 each, we still performed the same. The money didn't sort of influence us on how well we played. And I still am to this day. I'm still happy to play for nothing if I had to. It's not about the money. It was always just about, there's nothing better than playing in a band and having that team environment, because everyone's playing their part, and together collectively you make this sound, you make this energy, and you form these friendships and bonds with people. And I think that's the best thing that you can get out of playing music. That's why I like playing in a band.
A band that's experiencing success, like Blackfire did, and then breaking up. Do you want to talk about that?
Well, it was funny because, as I say, we did 12 years, and then all of a sudden we came to a bit of a stop because Bradley and became a father and had a family, and Kelly was working at the health service and required to sort of put in a lot of hours there. And then Selwyn had his family to raise and kids and all that. So me and Kutcher were the only sort of two left standing. So I remember having this conversation with Kutcher, saying either we form a brand new band if we want to keep going, or we replaced the original members with somebody else. And we decided that we'd form the Kutcher Edwards band. So that's what me and Kutcher did, was form them. And I played with Kutcher for the next 5 years, and we got a record deal that I got through Shock Records. And so the Kawinda album, we had a deal on that first album, and played for Kutcher for 5 years. And then that came to an end. And luckily enough for me, I started off into TV. So the band, we didn't sort of just say, well, that's it. We had a fight, I blew, and everyone went their own ways. It's sort of, after playing for 12 years, it sort of just gradually come to a bit of a fizzle out. And then, obviously during COVID, I started writing songs again, and old Blackfire songs, and that's why I reformed the band again with a new lineup.
Nice. I was going to ask a little bit more about that TV era for you, and especially with the Marngrook footy show, very successful show.
Well, it was a long time to get to that TV stage, because I did the show for 12 years on radio at 3CR, then over at 3KND when that formed. And originally when we pitched the show to the management or the program committee to have an Aboriginal football show at 3CR, it really wasn't their format, but it was a community-based radio station. And they said no the first time around. And then we went back again the second time and pushed our case again, and they said yes. So that was good. And then the first year, we won the best sports show on community radio. So we actually won an award in our first year. So we knew that we were onto something, right? So for the next 10, 11 years, I went there every Thursday and I did the show. I drove in from the western suburbs, and I said, one day this will be a TV show. And everyone thought, Grad's just off on his tangent and he's never going to get on TV. Then NITV came about. I had a phone call from a guy called Paul Marty, who was I think the assistant CEO at the time. And he came to Melbourne to have a listen, because he said, everywhere I go, people keep talking about this radio show called Marngrook, and you need to get that on TV. So he came down and listened to the show, and I was doing it with Sam Pang. Now, Sam Pang's all over Channel 10 at the moment. He's on Are You Paying Attention? He's got his own night show now. And so Sam worked on Marngrook for 5 years with me and Terry Wheeler. That was the last 5 years on radio. So he came down and heard the show, loved it, and said he wants to make it into a TV show. I wanted to get Sam to be my co-host originally on Marngrook, but they wanted an all-Indigenous panel. So Gilbert wasn't very good at the rehearsals as being a panellist, but I thought he'd be a great sidekick because he was absolutely a scream and funny. So Gilbert became the co-host, and Sam Pang went on to much bigger and better things than what me and Gilbert did. But yeah, we had 12 years, 13 years, I think it was, on TV. It was the number one show on NITV for about 12 of those years. We spent a couple of years at the ABC. We got nominated for 2 or 3 Logies. We won a couple other awards along the way, but it was a breeding ground for a lot of those people that appeared on the Marngrook Footy Show to venture off into working at Channel 7, working onto commercial radio stations, It was phenomenal in me being able to facilitate and giving people opportunity not to just work on Marngrook, but to be able to branch out into other forms of AFL media, which a lot of them did. So that was pleasing. And I suppose, like all good things, in the end, things have to wind up, and it did. So, but to be recognised as an iconic AFL footy show, one of the most successful, if not successful, TV shows in Indigenous history was something that we could all lay our hats on to,
He was a man with the Midas touch, it seems, mate. Whatever you touch on is gold at that.
Well, it takes hard work too, brother. They don't happen. You've got to have that commitment and passion, and you've got to be reliable, and you've got to, you've got to make sure that you put in the hard yards, because nothing comes easy. A boxer doesn't become a world champion if he doesn't train,
Yeah.
A swimmer doesn't win a gold medal unless he does a hard yard. So I'm very conscious of that work ethic and just believing in what I'm doing, and the results will speak for themselves. You keep doing the hard yards, eventually the wheel turns. It mightn't seem like it at times, but eventually it does.
It's really good to hear you say that, because, I definitely have experienced being a singer myself. Just being able to sing isn't good enough.
Cool.
I'm really happy with the songs that I write.
You can be the best singer in the world, best guitar player, but doesn't guarantee you anything.
You definitely have to put in a lot of work.
Yeah.
Behind the scenes.
Yeah, we did. And even in those Blackfire days, we used to rehearse 2 or 3 times a week for hours and hours, and we're so excited. Someone had a new song. How do you play that? So, and Grant's got a new song. So we were so excited about, that new music and making songs and the brotherhood. I mean, we have a Blackfire lineup now, which includes yourself and Daniel, and Sal's still there when he's well, and me and Brad, and it's just another musical journey of the brotherhood once again, and just that excitement of playing together and making new music and getting it played on radio, not just in Australia but around the world. So that takes another life of its own as well.
Yeah, I mean, you're touching on another area which I wanted to discuss with you in terms of, because right back from when you first started, even the things that you were part of, and the other members that were part of those projects with you, were able to go on and do bigger, better things. And I'm lucky enough now that I'm in this space with you as a part of Blackfire. And already I have experienced a lot of growth, and just being able to be in those rehearsal rooms, you and Sal and Brad, and hearing these stories, all this experience and this wealth of knowledge that you guys have, it's been worth it for me to be there for that long.
Thank you. And as you know, the fun is when you get into a recording studio, record songs.
Yeah.
And the way that we work, we're pretty laid back about how we do the recording. And I don't mean as you know, we don't muck around, but we like people to feel comfortable. We like people to bring something to the table as well. But you won't tell people how to play, or how to sing. We want people to be comfortable with themselves, and we just find that sort of chemistry works best.
Give us a couple of influences for yourself. Any mob that kind of was doing it before you?
Yeah, well, obviously I talked about Old 55 because when I was a kid growing up, Grease was a big movie. Happy Days was the #1 show. Everyone watched Happy Days. So you had this sort of 50s, 70s thing happening, and Old 55 came along at that right time, who were singing original music like On the Prowl, Looking for an Echo, and everyone knew those songs. So sort of we couldn't help but sort of gravitate towards that. But there was also bands like Dragon I liked as well, and Cold Chisel I love. So many. Skyhooks is a huge favourite. Richard Clapton. So all those Aussie bands I grew up listening to, they were good. I love the Angels. So another big band that I loved. Moving Pictures. There's so many good bands that I like. So I suppose all those influences came out somewhere when I wrote songs or I performed. But there were so many good people. You off the uni. But as I said, Indigenous wise, scrap metal. Me, Kelly and Brad love scrap metal. We used to play their music. They were the first band that I played on community radio that I played their album. And I thought, wow, they sound like the Eagles in terms of the production. The sound of the album was the first album I ever heard. Because a lot of the old albums didn't have that quality, but these guys did. And John Albers was the lead singer with Steve Pigram. So they had 2 lead singers, and they were just amazing. They blew me and Kelly and Brad away. So they were really, and then Black Ballad Music was another. And of course, Yothu Yindi came along and we were into their music. So they were probably the 3 bands from an Indigenous perspective that I really liked. So did Brad and Kelly and Sal, that we gravitated towards them because they were top bands. Black Ballad Music was an awesome band. They should have went, big around the world as well. They were fantastic.
Yeah. So the media experience, the success that you had there as well, you came back to music.
Yeah.
And you've restarted Blackfire. You're also in a couple of other projects, solo projects. Quickly tell me about those.
Well, coming back to Blackfire is like going back to your ex-girlfriend. You know what you're up for. And getting back to play with, as I mentioned, Sal quite a few times now, and Brad, to get back playing with those boys. And it wasn't a deliberate thing that we thought we were going to get Blackfire back together. It just happened during COVID, and Sal's got some great songs that we wanted to record, and I've written a few new ones as well. So, the planets aligned basically. So we got the band back together. But and getting you into the band, David, was absolutely awesome because Kutch is such an iconic figure in Aboriginal communities, and as a singer and being our front man, the big question for us was, who are we going to get to replace someone like Butcher? And I like it a bit now when I look back to like, who's going to replace Bon Scott and AC/DC, And then Brian Johnson came along and the band went to the next step, they went to the next level, and Back in Black's the second biggest selling album of all time. So to be able to get someone like you, who's such a great singer and a great performer and is such a professional person to work with, we were very, very lucky, and we're lucky to have you join us into the band, and you fit like a hand in a glove, basically. So to be able to have you and these last 2 albums that we brought out, they've been our most successful Blackfire albums so far. The latest one's getting airplay all around the world, and it's just got so many good songs on there, and there's a variety of songs. There's rock, there's middle of the road songs, and some of the slower ones that Selwyn wrote, It Never Rains in the Bush, are really great listening songs and culturally relevant and give you an insight into Aboriginal culture. But just being, those last 2 albums, and to be able to go another step than what we had before, and just to have you as a singer, you're such a great singer in your own right. But we're very, very lucky, to have, we had Kutch, but now we've got someone that's taken us to another level. So we're pretty fortunate in that.
Oh, thank you. It's a gift being able to sing the songs you guys have written. So thank you for bringing me into that. And thank you again for coming in here today.
Yeah.
I wouldn't mind just finishing off with one more question. This is for all your audiences that you've had of all ages, and especially for the younger generations that may be listening today. If you could go back and give that younger guy any advice in this music industry, what would that be?
It's a good question. I think you just got to stay doing what you love, because you're never going to be a success overnight. Very rarely that happens, right? So if you start to do something and you do it because you love it and you enjoy it, you've got to stay the journey. If you want to, it took John Farnham 25 years to become famous in his own right. He went from Johnny Farnham to John Farnham to Whispering Jack and then a household name, So sometimes it just takes, it's a long journey, and you just got to play it and do it because you love it. If you're thinking about the money, it mightn't happen for you, but here I am still playing many years later, playing because I like playing with my brothers, and I like playing in a band.
I didn't know. Johnny Farnham, 25 years. I've got about 5 years to wait. Thank you very much.
Thank you, fella.
Grant Hansen.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.